Have you been the one who always gives a little more, waits a little longer, and walks away with less than you deserved? Libra, this message didn't find you by accident, because somewhere deep inside, you already knowed. You've been paying for things that were never yours to carry. Old promises, unspoken guilt, emotional debts that were never fair, and now something shifts. Not with noise, not with revenge, but with balance. In 2026, the universe doesn't ask you to fight anymore. It adjusts. The scales begin to move, quietly, precisely, in your favor. If this is hitting a nerve right now, stay with me. Trust that feeling. Take a breath. Leave a comment if you feel seen. Subscribe if you're ready to stop carrying what isn't yours. Because what comes next is where the story truly begins. You know what's strange, Libra? The moment you finally stop explaining yourself to the world, the weight becomes noticeable. Not because it just appeared, but because you've been carrying it for so long that you forgot what it feels like to set it down. I want you to listen closely now. Not as someone seeking answers, but as someone who already knows the truth and is finally ready to admit it. For years you didn't just compromise, you absorbed other people's expectations, other people's emotions, other people's unfinished business. You told yourself it was maturity. You called it kindness. You said it's fine, I can handle it. And maybe you could, but at a cost no one ever acknowledged. You became the quiet one who made things smooth, the one who kept the peace even when your chest felt tight, and your nights felt longer than they should. You didn't just give love. You carried responsibility that was never yours. You held space for guilt that didn't belong to you. You paid emotional debts for people who never planned to repay them. And here's the part that matters most. You didn't fail by doing that, you learned. But learning doesn't mean lifetime enrollment. Something deep inside you already senses it. That subtle shift, that quiet release happening beneath the surface. Because 2026 isn't arriving with demands. It isn't asking you to prove anything. It isn't testing your patience one more time. It's closing a chapter that stayed open far longer than it should have. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with completion. There's a difference. This is the year you stop paying for lessons you've already mastered. The year you stop being the emotional accountant balancing books that were never yours to manage. And no, this doesn't mean you harden your heart. It means you finally respect it. You begin to notice how your body responds differently now, how certain conversations feel heavier than they used to, how certain silences feel safer. That's not you becoming distant. That's you becoming honest. The universe recognizes that shift. When Libra stops overgiving, the scales don't tip into chaos. They recalibrate. Quietly, precisely. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to justify it. You don't even have to fully understand it yet. All you need to do is stop reaching backward. Because what you've endured has already done its work. The debt is cleared. The lesson is integrated. The cycle knows its time. And as you stand here now, right on the edge of this realization, you might feel a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. That's okay. That's what it feels like when something old finally loosens its grip, and something truer begins to take shape. Stay with me. Because once the weight falls away, the scales don't just stop moving. They begin to adjust. And here's where it gets quieter, Libra. Not emptier. Just quieter in a way that feels intentional. Because when you finally stop carrying what was never yours, the world doesn't collapse. It rebalances. You may not notice it all at once. There's no dramatic announcement. No sudden thunder in the sky. It shows up differently. In the way situations stop pulling you off center. In the way conversations don't drain you the way they used to. In the way people reveal themselves without you having to ask. This is the wheel of fortune at work, not spinning wildly, but settling back onto its true axis. For a long time, the scales were tilted because you kept adjusting yourself instead of letting life respond. You bent, you softened, you absorbed the imbalance so others wouldn't have to feel it, but the universe was watching. And now something subtle begins to shift. Not to punish anyone, not to reward you with spectacle, but to restore alignment. What once slipped through your hands returns in unexpected forms. Not always as the same thing. Sometimes as clarity, sometimes as protection, sometimes as a door quietly opening, where there was once only silence. And those moments that felt unfair start to make sense in hindsight. Not because they were right, but because they led you here. You don't need to justify yourself anymore, Libra. You don't need to explain why you stepped back, or why your boundaries feel firmer now. The scales respond the moment you stop forcing them. That's the part most people never realize. The universe doesn't adjust when you demand balance. It adjusts when you stop self-sacrificing. When you choose yourself without guilt. When you say no without rehearsing a reason. When you walk away without waiting for permission. This is not you becoming colder. This is you becoming accurate. You may feel moments of discomfort as things realign. That's normal. Balance always feels strange at first when you've been leaning for years. Some connections will feel lighter. Others may drift away without confrontation or closure. That's not loss. That's gravity correcting itself. You're no longer required to hold everything together. The system recalibrates on its own once you stop being the counterweight. And in this space, where effort is no longer confused with love, you begin to feel something rare, ease. Not the kind that makes you passive, but the kind that tells you you're finally standing in the right place. Stay present here. Let the quiet do its work. Because once balance returns, it doesn't stop at the surface. It continues inward. Deeper than habits, deeper than memory. And that's where the next layer of this story begins. And this is the moment, Libra, when something inside you finally stops reaching back. Not because you're angry. Not because you've hardened. But because there is nothing left to retrieve. Some connections don't end loudly. They don't explode or collapse. They simply complete themselves. You might notice it as a quiet absence. A name that no longer stirs emotion. A memory that feels distant, like a place you once lived, but no longer recognize as home. For a long time, you stayed because you believed there was more to learn, more patience to practice, more understanding to offer, more balance to restore on your own. But here's the truth most people never reach. A lesson ends when repetition stops teaching you anything new. Those relationships that asked you to give more than you received. Those dynamics where effort flowed in only one direction. Those unspoken agreements where your silence became the price of peace. They served their purpose. Not because they were fair, but because they shaped your discernment. You learned where your limits are. You learned the difference between compromise and self-erasure. You learned that harmony cannot exist when only one heart is doing the work. And now, Libra, there is no unfinished business left in those chapters. You don't need closure conversations. You don't need apologies that arrive too late. You don't need to revisit the past to prove how much you grew. The cycle knows it's done. There is a calm certainty that replaces the old questioning. A sense that you've outgrown the roles you once played. The mediator. The peacekeeper. The one who carried the emotional weight, so others wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. You don't carry that title anymore. Not because you failed, but because you graduated. 2026 doesn't reopen doors you struggled to close. It confirms that closing them was the correct choice. This is what karmic completion actually feels like. Not dramatic, not vengeful, just clear. Clear enough that you no longer mistake familiarity for destiny. Clear enough that you don't confuse effort with love. Clear enough that you recognize when something has truly run its course. There's a subtle dignity in this stage. A quiet strength. You're not proving anything now. You're honoring what you already know. And as the old cycle settles into its final place, you may feel a brief moment of emptiness. That's natural. When something occupies your life for so long, its absence can feel unfamiliar, even when it's necessary. But don't rush to fill that space. Let it breathe, because this space isn't meant to be filled with repetition. It's meant to make room. Room for choices that don't drain you. Room for connections that meet you halfway. Room for a version of you that no longer has to overextend to belong. Stay here with me a little longer. Because once a cycle fully closes, it doesn't just leave silence behind. It prepares the ground for a very different kind of beginning. There's something you've learned the hard way, Libra. Not through advice, not through books, but through exhaustion. You stayed longer than you should have. Not because you were weak, but because you believed in potential, in growth, in the idea that if you loved with enough patience, balance would eventually appear. You gave second chances to people who never questioned their first mistakes. You waited for change, while quietly adjusting yourself in the meantime. You told yourself hope was a virtue, and for a while it was. But hope, when it keeps costing you your peace, turns into a gamble. You know that feeling, that moment when you sense the scales tipping, but you stay anyway. When your body knows before your mind does that something is off. For years, you placed your calm on the table and betted on someone else's potential. Their promises, their words. Their someday 2026 changes that instinct. Not with anger, not with walls, but with discernment. You're no longer willing to sacrifice inner quiet, just to keep something alive. You no longer confuse emotional effort with love. You no longer stay awake at night, trying to solve problems that aren't yours to fix. This is where your standards shift. Not upward, but inward. You begin to notice how peace feels when it's uninterrupted. How clarity sounds when it isn't drowned out by justification. How light your chest feels when you stop negotiating with discomfort. And something important happens here. You stop explaining yourself. You don't need to convince anyone why certain energies no longer fit. Why certain conversations feel heavier now. Why you're choosing distance over debate. Balance becomes non-negotiable. Not perfection, not harmony at all costs, but reciprocity. If something meets you halfway, it stays. If it pulls you off center, it doesn't. This isn't cruelty. It's accuracy. You're not closing your heart, Libra. You're placing it where it can breathe. There may be moments when old habits try to resurface. The urge to smooth things over. The reflex to give one more chance. The quiet voice that asks if you're being too much. Pause there. That voice belongs to an older version of you. The one who thought peace was something you had to earn. You don't need to earn it anymore. Peace is no longer a reward. It's a requirement. And as you begin to live by that truth, life responds differently. People respond differently. Situations reveal their alignment without effort on your part. You feel less pulled, less torn, more rooted, and in that grounded space, something new becomes possible. Not because you chased it, but because you made room. Stay with that feeling. Because once you stop gambling your peace, what enters next knows exactly how to respect it. And this is where the energy changes, Libra. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but in a way that feels almost unfamiliar at first. Because what's coming toward you now doesn't demand your endurance. It doesn't test your patience. It doesn't ask you to prove your worth by how much you can hold together. It arrives softly, like a room filled with light that doesn't blind you, like music playing at a volume that lets you breathe. This is temperance, not excitement that burns fast, not intensity that leaves you tired, but balance that stays. You may notice it in the smallest ways. In how conversations no longer feel like negotiations. In how your shoulders stay relaxed instead of braced. There's no urgency here, no pressure to rush. No emotional roller coaster disguised as passion. And for a moment, your nervous system might not know what to do with that. Peace can feel strange when chaos was once familiar. But stay with it. Because this energy isn't trying to impress you, it's trying to support you. It may show up as a person who doesn't pull you off center. Someone whose presence feels steady. Someone who listens without needing to fix you or reshape you into something else. Or it may come as a partnership. A collaboration that feels mutual. An exchange where effort flows both ways without keeping score. Or maybe, Libra, it arrives as a quieter shift within you. A way of living where you no longer feel on edge. Where your days aren't dictated by emotional weather. Where your nights feel restful again. Whatever form it takes, there is one unmistakable sign. You feel safe being yourself. No editing. No performing. No calculating how much of you is too much or not enough. Your words come out cleaner. Your boundaries feel natural. Your laughter doesn't carry tension behind it. This is healing that doesn't announce itself. It simply integrates. And you don't have to chase it. That's the beauty of this stage. The moment you stopped gambling your peace, the universe stopped sending lessons and started sending alignment. Temperance doesn't rush in. It waits until you're ready to receive without bracing for impact. You may catch yourself wondering if it's really this simple now. Let that question pass. Not everything meaningful has to be hard-earned through struggle. Some things arrive because you finally made room. Because you no longer mistake intensity for truth. Because you no longer equate love with sacrifice. Because you've learned the difference between excitement and safety. And as this calm presence settles into your life, you begin to trust yourself differently. Your intuition sharpens. Your choices feel clearer. Your heart doesn't feel like it's on trial anymore. This is not the end of your story, Libra. It's the moment the tone shifts. From survival to alignment, from effort to ease. And as you stand here, held by something steady and kind, you may start to sense it. The quiet realization that once peace becomes familiar, everything else must rise to meet it. There's a quiet confidence settling into you now, Libra. Not the kind that announces itself. The kind that doesn't need approval to exist. You can feel it in how you move through your days. More intentional, less reactive. As if something inside you finally remembers its own weight. This is what happens when self-worth stops being an idea and becomes a practice. You no longer pour your energy everywhere, hoping something will stick. You choose where your time goes. You choose what deserves your attention. You choose what gets access to your inner world. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, life begins to respond, not with sudden windfalls or dramatic turning points, but with steadiness. Money starts to behave differently. Not because you chased it harder, but because your relationship with value changed. You stopped undervaluing your time. You stopped offering your best energy at a discount. You stopped confusing sacrifice with loyalty. And in that shift, opportunities begin to show up that don't ask you to abandon yourself. They arrive quietly. They grow slowly. They last. This is abundance that doesn't rush. Abundance that doesn't cost your peace. Abundance that feels earned without exhaustion. You may notice how decisions feel clearer now, how you no longer feel torn between security and fulfillment. How love and money stop competing for your attention. They start to align. When your self-worth is intact, nothing needs to fight for its place. Relationships begin to mirror that stability. There's less confusion, less mixed signals, less emotional accounting. You no longer have to choose between being loved and being respected. Both become possible at the same time. This is the reward no one talks about. Not because it's flashy, but because it's sustainable. You wake up without the low-grade anxiety that used to accompany your plans. You move forward without constantly questioning if you're doing too much or asking for too much. You aren't. You're simply aligned. And when alignment becomes your baseline, the universe doesn't need to push you forward. It meets you where you stand. There's dignity in this phase, Libra. A sense of self-possession. You're not proving your worth anymore, you're living from it. You'll notice how others respond differently. Some will rise to meet you, others will quietly fade when they realize you no longer overextend to accommodate them. Both outcomes are part of balance. Nothing is being taken from you now, nothing is being withheld. What comes to you comes because it fits. And as this rhythm settles in, you may feel a deeper sense of trust. Not just in the universe, but in yourself. You trust your timing. You trust your discernment. You trust that what's meant for you doesn't require you to shrink or strain. Stay grounded here. Let this stability root itself, because once your value becomes undeniable to you, the world adjusts again. Not to test you, but to reflect what you now know, and that reflection is about to reveal something important, about who still belongs in your life, and who no longer does. There's a subtle shift you begin to notice now, Libra. Not in you, but around you. Certain faces appear less often. Certain voices grow quieter. Certain presences that once felt constant start to drift to the edges of your life. It doesn't happen with arguments. There's no dramatic goodbye. No need for explanation. It's simply gravity doing its work. Some people are still watching you from a distance. You can feel it. They notice the way you move differently now. The way your energy no longer bends toward them. The way your life seems to flow forward without needing their approval. And that shift can be activating, not because you did anything wrong, but because your growth highlights where they chose to remain the same. You don't need to harden yourself against this. You don't need to defend your path. Their reactions are not a measure of your truth. What's happening here is karmic clarity. For a long time you were the stabilizer, the one who held the balance by carrying more than your share. When you stepped back, the imbalance became visible. And now, Those who benefited from your over-giving no longer know where to place themselves. That's not your responsibility. They don't lose access to you because you shut them out. They lose access because the version of you that overextended no longer exists. You've changed the orbit. And when the center shifts, some bodies simply can't follow. This is not abandonment. It's alignment. Their lesson isn't to chase you. It's to witness you living well without contorting yourself to keep them comfortable. That is the karma, not punishment, not loss, but awareness. You don't need to look back to confirm this. You don't need to check who's watching or who's talking. The scales have already settled, and there's something powerful about that. You move forward without dragging the past behind you. You make decisions without scanning the room for reactions. You allow joy without bracing for consequences. That freedom didn't come from winning. It came from releasing. Some people will quietly fall away. Others may attempt to re-enter once they sense the distance. Trust yourself here. If something truly belongs, it will meet you at your new level without asking you to step down. If it doesn't, it will fade without resistance. You don't need to manage the exit. The universe handles that now. Your role is simply to remain where you are, centered, clear, unmoved. There's a dignity in this phase, Libra. A calm authority. You're no longer proving your worth or explaining your boundaries. You're living them. And as the space around you clears, something else becomes possible. Not louder connections, not more intense ones, but truer ones. Connections that recognize you without needing you to shrink or stretch. Connections that arrive already in balance. Stay present for this moment. Because once those who cannot keep up fall out of orbit, what remains has room to fully arrive, and that arrival is quieter than you expect. But it changes everything. There is a moment you reach, Libra, when life no longer feels like something you have to manage. You notice it in the quiet parts of your day, in the way your breath settles without effort, in the way your thoughts no longer race to keep everything balanced. This is not relief after chaos. It is alignment after truth. You are no longer paying for what you did not break. You are no longer carrying weight that was never meant for your hands. You are no longer adjusting your life to fit around other people's discomfort. And something remarkable happens when that stops. Life becomes lighter, not empty, just honest. Your days begin to move at a pace that feels natural. Not rushed, not delayed, simply right. You start choosing differently, not out of fear, but out of clarity. You say yes without hesitation when something feels clean. You say no without guilt when something pulls you off center. There is no inner argument anymore. The connections that remain in your life now feel earned in the truest sense. Not because you fought for them, but because they meet you where you stand. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to justify your boundaries. You don't have to apologize for needing balance. That need is no longer negotiable. And in 2026, that truth becomes your foundation. This is a cycle where you live from equilibrium, not effort. Where peace is not something you chase, but something you protect. Where love and respect arrive together, or not at all. You may look back at the version of yourself who carried so much and feel a quiet tenderness. Not regret, gratitude, because that version brought you here. But this chapter is different. Here, you wake up without bracing for the day. You move through your choices without second-guessing your worth. You feel present in your own life instead of managing it from a distance. There is space now. Space to enjoy what you have built. Space to receive without preparing to give something up in return. Space to simply be. And in that space, something settles deeply. A sense that you are finally in the right place at the right time. Not because everything is perfect, but because it is aligned. This is what it means when the universe adjusts, not to reward you, not to punish anyone else, but to place you exactly where you belong. You were never meant to live tilted. You were never meant to hold everything together alone. You were always meant to stand in the center of your own life. And now you are. Take a moment here. Let that truth land. Let your body recognize the ease. Let your heart rest in it. Because this is not the end of your story, Libra. It is the beginning of living it from the right balance. And from here, everything that enters your life knows exactly where it stands. And if you're still here with me, Libra, take a moment. Because the fact that you stayed until now already tells me something important about you. You're not looking for noise, you're looking for truth. For balance. For a life that finally feels like it fits. What you've just heard isn't a promise. It's a reminder. A reminder that you don't need to earn peace anymore. You don't need to explain your worth. You don't need to carry what was never meant to be yours. The universe isn't testing you now. It's aligning with you. And when that happens, life stops pushing and starts responding. If something in this message touched you, if a sentence landed a little deeper than expected, let yourself acknowledge it. Leave a comment, not for me, for you, because your voice matters here. If this space feels safe, if this energy feels familiar, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This isn't just content. It's a community of people who are done living off balance and ready to move forward with clarity and grace. And most of all, Libra, trust yourself. You've already done the hardest part. You listened. You let go. You chose alignment over struggle. This journey doesn't end here. In fact, it's just beginning. There's another message waiting, another layer unfolding, and when the timing is right, it will find you. Until then, stay grounded, stay gentle with yourself, and remember, when the scales are finally balanced, everything else knows where it belongs.